but I think most people are going to win, and I think it's going to be a tight game. I think it's going to be a competitive game. I mean, I'm going to, think the Eagles are probably going to come out with a close one and come out on top.
Greetings, folks. Bobby Kelly from Sports Radio 94 WIP. I spend a lot of nights listening to this man fill in, do a great job for Big Daddy Gray. Are you still on late night, TK?
Yeah, from time to time, Jeff. I mean, John Johnson's doing the full-time overnights now, but you can hear me from time to time on the overnight show. I'll be in tonight after Thursday Night Football, tomorrow night after our Phillies coverage. So, times move around a lot, but you can catch me on.
Yeah, I always feel like if I'm listening to WIP at night, you're on, Jody Mack's on. So somebody's on I like listening to. But I was going to start with Cowboys-Eagles here, but ESPN decided to drop a bombshell article this morning on our favorite person, Daniel Snyder. I don't know if you caught that or not.
You know what, Jeff? It's funny that you mentioned that because during the break here, I'm just sitting on scrolling Twitter, and I see you retweet this story from Don Van Natta. And the headline, Daniel Snyder's got dirt on other NFL owners. So when we're done with this interview here, I'm going to have to go check out that piece because this sounds pretty interesting. Sounds like pretty interesting stuff on a Thursday morning.
Yeah, so pretty much here's the gist of it. There's a lot to read. I only got through a quarter of this, but the NFL is a mafia. Dan Snyder recently told an associate, all the owners hate each other. This is what Dan Snyder thinks. One veteran owner said that's not true. All the owners hate Dan.
And I would think it's somewhere in the middle a little bit, but I mean Dan Snyder, the idea that he is still the owner of that franchise is a disgrace. It really is. Like, this is something the owners had the ability to take control of a long time ago. If they really wanted him out, they could have gotten him out. And the fact that he still owns that franchise, the fact that he still is involved as he is, I think is a real black mark on the league because we know how not just dysfunctional they've been, but how inappropriate they've run a lot of the things in their organization. And, I'm interested to see what comes out of this. But, yeah, I think it's kind of disgraceful for the league that Snyder's even still in to begin with.
Yeah, so the parts I read of this, some of it has to do with Jerry Jones because there is a push to get him out all of a sudden. And he said, I'll put it nicely, they can't F with me. I have dirt on Jerry Jones that could blow the whole league up. So maybe there is something there. Who knows?
Well, whatever this is, I mean, I think a lot of people are going to try to get to the bottom of it here. So I'm interested to see Jerry Jones' reaction to this because I think that'll tell us really what Dan Snyder knows and what he doesn't know.
Yeah, and this is the part I was reading. So the owners were kind of indifferent on him because remember he was 34. He was our age when he became the owner of the Commanders. Mm-hmm. We know what they used to be called, but they were okay with him, I guess, until 2003 when he was trying to make a push for FedEx Field to host the Super Bowl. Do you remember that, Tom, when he was trying that?
I don't remember that, but I could say as somebody who's gone to FedEx Field to watch a number of Eagles Washington games, yeah, that place should never host a Super Bowl.
Yeah, so he was trying to make a push for it, right? I think he wanted the nation's capital to host one, and everybody thought there was an ulterior motive there. Okay, maybe he wants to get a new stadium, and they're like, fine, whatever. Like, they listened to his push, but the Bidwells, the Cardinals owners, were pushing for the Super Bowl, and the NFL loves them. The league and Tagliabue actually did a secret ballot to make sure they got it, and obviously they won. That was the year the Giants beat the Patriots, mm-hmm. And Snyder acted like a child and threw out a hissy fit, and the owners were like, okay, this guy's a jerk, this guy's this. He went and smashed every owner like he could, figuring out who was involved in the secret ballot, and that's when everything kind of changed on him. Yeah, you'll want to read this, Tom. Like, I've only been through a quarter of it. This is some pretty wild stuff, and again, I'm not even neck deep into it.
Yeah, it sounds pretty interesting, and we'll see what comes out of this thing here. But I mean, Daniel Snyder's been causing this league headaches for a long time. It's not really surprising that that's continuing now.
Yeah. So I wanted to bring this up to you. Eagles-Cowboys rivalry. I know you've talked about this on WIP before. I know a lot of your coworkers have. In your mind, who is the Eagles' biggest rival?
In my mind, it's the Giants. And this is from somebody growing up, as you mentioned, I'm 35 now. So, my prime of like watching football was, late 90s, early 2000s, grade school, high school, and stuff like that. And to be honest, Jeff, the Cowboys just haven't been very relevant. I mean, they haven't been. This isn't like, I remember the Troy Smith teams, but it's like in the last 20, 25 years, what have the Cowboys accomplished? Not much of anything. And it's been the Eagles, it's been the Giants in that time period with Donovan and Andy. I mean, they were the teams going at it, year after year for the NFC East title. So in my mind, the Giants are the Eagles' biggest rival, not just geographically, but competitively. And sometimes I do think the whole Eagle Cowboy thing is from a past era, a past generation. And honestly, I get a little annoyed by it sometimes with how over the top it can be.
Oh, I know. And so my dad's generation, yeah, it was the Cowboys because I think Dick Vermeil played that. Like, okay, there's a team we look up to. There's a team we have to beat if we want to be a Super Bowl team. I think the fans went off that. But the whole Buddy Ryan era, like he hated Dallas. I think that really played into obviously where you work and everything else. Like it just felt like, okay, Cowboys are big brother, we're little bro. Now I feel like the Eagles are Cowboys big brother and the fans can't stand it.
Yeah. And, the Cowboys, like the Buddy Ryan era, and, I during that time period, I understand the rivalry is a thing. I understand Buddy Ryan played into it, but it's a different era now. And I feel like it's a different generation of fans. And like this rivalry just hasn't been at that level since then. The Cowboys haven't been all that competitive. I mean, what do they have? A handful of playoff wins in the last 25 years. And I just think when you really look at, like, I'm not saying Eagles fans like the Cowboys. Of course they don't. And anybody in the division will feel that way about. And Eagles Cowboys games are always going to be big. But that hatred that was there at that time, I feel like when we play it up now, it's more forced than authentic.
Yeah. I think one of my favorite stats was I uncovered when they won the Super Bowl, the Nick Foles year. The Eagles won more playoff games in one postseason than the Cowboys did since 1995. And yeah. I think Eagles fans were like, oh my God, we got dirt on them forever.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the division over that time period. I mean, the Eagles have probably been, I would say from wins perspective, the most successful team. Obviously, the Giants have the 2 Super Bowls, but I mean, it hasn't really been close. It's been the Eagles and Giants, and then, the Cowboys and Washington very far behind both of them.
Yeah, and to me, I work with a lot of Giants fans, so I get to hear it all the time. It's, I can't wait till they play the Eagles. I can't wait till we beat the Eagles. I'm like, you haven't beaten the Eagles since what? Well, this was back when the Eagles were on the long winning streak against them, but it is kind of funny now how the Eagles have a winning record against the Giants. They never did until 2018. But they have a losing record against every other of their rivals in the NFC East. So it's kind of funny to have that over New York.
Yeah, definitely. And honestly, that's probably what plays into my standpoint on this rivalry a little bit too, because I went to Temple. My roommate was a Giants fan, and I was friends with a bunch of Giants fans at college. So I think that plays into why I don't like that team very much either.
Yeah, I think what hurt me with the Giants was Andy Reid being good all those years of Philadelphia. I said this to Tone at the top of the show. And then the Giants go on and win 2 Super Bowls during the Reid era. And I think that actually kind of reshaped a lot of people's opinions on Andy Reid.
Yeah, definitely. And, the Eagles, what they were able to do under Andy, not just against them, but against this entire division. I mean, really dominance. And it's crazy when you see that stat, and this stat always amazes me about how long it's been since somebody's repeated in this division, the cyclical nature of it. And, how it's really a year-to-year thing now is pretty crazy, because the last time there was that kind of dominance was with the Eagles in the early 2000s.
Yeah, and if you look at it, since 97, there's only been one repeat winner too, and that's the Eagles. So this division's had a lot of parity for a lot of years. To me, I don't know. I wanted to get into this too. What's your take on Jerry Jones and him speaking Monday every Tuesday? It does feel like it's a lot of nothing at this point.
Yeah, I think it's silly. And I think it's just a Jerry Jones kind of self-indulgence thing that, he needs to be out there. He needs to be talking. He needs to get his face out there. But what he says really, really doesn't matter at this point. I mean, I heard you talking about with Tone the last segment about how he said Dak was going to be back week 4. Like, we all knew that wasn't going to happen. Like, that injury is going to take a little longer to recover from. And yeah, I think it's silly, but hey, he's the owner and he's going to certainly keep doing it until he's not, out in front for that organization anymore.
Don't you think it's the best thing for the Eagles that Jerry Jones still remains like in charge of pretty much everything for Dallas?
Definitely. And I think he gets in the way of what at times I think is a pretty well-run organization. Like, despite what we like to say about the Cowboys, they draft pretty well. Like, they get, impact players out of the draft. You look at the last couple of years, Parsons, CeeDee Lamb kind of fell to them in that first round. But I think where Jerry gets involved and where it's a problem for them is he lets his emotions get in the way and he gives a lot of money out, to players maybe he shouldn't. Like, I thought at the time, them signing to Ezekiel Elliott to that contract was a mistake. And you look at some of the contracts they've given out, they paid a couple guys a lot of money. That's cost them in a number of areas, especially on the offensive line. And I think that's where Jerry gets in the way the most with the Cowboys.
I actually think the Cowboys are one of the Eagles' biggest threats in the NFC because I have been impressed with what they've done on defense. How do you make of this Cowboys team so far through 5 games?
I mean, they've been impressive, honestly. I mean, to continue to win without Dak, because let's face it, week 1, when Dak was out there, they looked terrible in that game against Tampa Bay. I mean, offensively, they couldn't do anything. And I've been impressed with how they've bounced back. Now, moving forward, like, I always think a guy like Mike McCarthy will cost you in big games because I don't think he's a very good coach. But, I've been impressed with what they've done with Cooper Rush. And obviously, I mean, their defensive line, DeMarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons, I'm not sure you're going to find a better 1-2 as far as pass rushers, not just in the NFC East, but across the NFL.
On WIP, how's the pulse of Dallas week been? Do Eagles fans think they're going to crush them?
Well, I think it's been, a little different this week because we've had the Phillies in the playoffs, which is something, we haven't had for a long time. But generally, that's what you hear. I mean, it's hard sometimes to distinguish between whether that's just bravado and what people actually think. But I think most people are going to win, and I think it's going to be a tight game. I think it's going to be a competitive game. I mean, I'm going to, think the Eagles are probably going to come out with a close one and come out on top. But I certainly think it's going to be a competitive game, and I don't think it's going to be a walkover for the Eagles.
I don't either. But there's one thing I learned about that Rams game, the last game. Did you notice Cooper Rush kind of had some vulnerability? Like, he wasn't not like he ever was Superman, but there was definitely some kryptonite that the Rams exposed with him.
Yeah, I didn't see a ton of that. I was actually out in Arizona with a couple of my friends for that game, so I didn't catch a ton of the Eagles-Rams game. But, yeah, I mean, I think Cooper Rush is an interesting guy because I think what they're asking him to do, they're basically asking him to manage the game, for a better word. Like, they're not asking him to do too much, and I think they got ahead early in that game. They kind of, were a little conservative, but I'd be interested, and I think this is what the Eagles really need to look to do on Sunday night is if they can get off to an early lead, hopefully a 10, 14-point lead, that'll be interesting to see Cooper Rush in that sort of a scenario, whether he could bring them back, because he really hasn't had to do that yet. I guess they fell behind a little bit in the Giants game, but yeah, that would be, I think, the formula for the Eagles. Get ahead and see if Cooper Rush can bring them back.
What's been your take on the Giants 4-1 start?
I'm impressed by it. I don't think it's necessarily sustainable, but I thought the Giants honestly had a really good offseason. I mean, Brian Daboll, I thought did a tremendous job in Buffalo. I think he's doing a good job. There were some game management things specifically in that Dallas game that concerned me about him a little bit, but I think he knows what he's doing. He's obviously setting the culture there and doing a good job. That was an impressive win over Green Bay this past weekend. I think, their GM, Joe Shane, is certainly an upgrade over Gettleman. It's hard for there not to be an upgrade there. But, yeah, I think they're moving in the right direction. I still don't think they're a legit contender this season. I think they're bound to fall off at this point. But moving forward, I certainly think those guys have the Giants heading in the right direction.
With all the parity, though, in the NFL, and the Giants are a little ahead of the whole 2-3 win clan right now. Do you think they could potentially be a playoff team, sneak in the NFC?
They could. I mean, certainly, the potential for that is there. I do think, though, playing the games against the Eagles and the Cowboys, because I expect when the season is over, the Eagles and the Cowboys, I think both of them will be in the playoffs. I think in the North, I still believe the Packers will find a way in. I think the Vikings will be in. And then, you're really asking at that point, are the Giants going to beat out, the Rams or a team like that for the postseason? And I don't think it's impossible, but I'm not ready to say that I believe that's going to happen yet.
Right now, I keep trying to talk myself out of it, but right now I think the Eagles are the front runners in the NFC. I mean, the record says it, the numbers say it, how they're playing says it. They seem to get tested now every week. They're getting everybody's best shot. But who do you think are their biggest contenders for the Super Bowl right
now? I still think it's Tampa. I do. I still look at that team, and I know they haven't looked like they've been firing on all cylinders to start the year here, but I still think that's the team that you worry about the most. I mean, I like San Francisco, and I actually think, not that an injury is ever a good thing, but that team I do think rallies around Jimmy Garoppolo, and I do think that continuity of him being there the past couple of years, I think they're a team, especially with their defense, to watch out for. But aside from that, I do think it's wide open. I think the Eagles are clearly the best team in the East. But if you had to say a team in the conference who would worry me the most, it's still Tampa until somebody really takes control of that other spot.
Does it feel like the Rams they've fallen off the pedestal a bit?
Definitely. And I thought that was kind of likely coming into this season. There was just a lot of weird stuff surrounding them in the offseason, like will Aaron Donald retire? Will McVay step away? And the whole Stafford injury situation. They've certainly taken a step back. I think the Allen Robinson situation is really, really odd. I mean, just the fact they can't seem to integrate him into the offense at all is really concerning. And I think they become somewhat predictable. So, yeah, I think, that team, I would expect them to still sneak their way into the playoffs. But, I don't look at them in the same vein as we looked at them last year as being a real, Super Bowl contender, Super Bowl favorite.
It's kind of crazy. We live in an alternate reality where the Eagles could have had Russell Wilson and Allen Robinson. What a disaster that would have been for Howie Roseman.
Man, and I'm not going to lie, Jeff, I wanted Russell Wilson really bad. I thought that was the move for the Eagles to make. I don't know what's happened to him, whether he's just finished or, I know they said this injury situation now. But, yeah, he looks really bad in the Allen Robinson thing. He's a guy I wouldn't have hated. I didn't hate that contract the Rams gave him. But you look at it, he got a very similar contract to what the Eagles ended up giving Hassan Reddick. I would much rather have Hassan Reddick on my team right now than Allen Robinson.
Yeah, Hassan Reddick to me has been everything the Eagles have asked for and more. And even when he was having a slow start, you could tell he was still making an impact on the game. What have your thoughts ultimately been, you being a Temple guy, on what Hassan Reddick brings to his defense?
I think he's brought them exactly what they need and exactly what they signed him for. I mean, you look at last year, and I know we criticized Jonathan Gannon a lot. I just didn't think he had the players, and they really struggled to rush the passer, struggled to get after the quarterback and get sacks. And you see Hassan Reddick already having an impact. He basically single-handedly, won them that Jacksonville game. And you look at how he's been impacting the game in that way. It's been something they've desperately needed, and the pass rush has already been dramatically different this year.
I've been on record of saying Dallas's defensive line is clearly the best in the NFL. Obviously, you got Michael Parsons, you got DeMarcus Lawrence, Dorrance Armstrong, etc. But they're actually facing a real offensive line this week. They're not facing the Bengals and what they were trying to do on the offensive line. They're not facing Washington. They're not facing the Rams and their bad offensive line. So what do you think is going to happen, especially if Jordan Mailata is healthy on Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Eagles' offensive line, I think they can stack up against anybody. I really do. But I think it's a situation where, especially if Mailata is not out there, you need to help on Micah Parsons. I mean, you really do. That guy is just dangerous. Now, Lane Johnson, I think you trust him to go up against Lawrence. They've faced each other quite a bit in their careers. And Lawrence has gotten the best of him at times, but I think you trust him over there. But Micah Parsons is a real special player, and you need to find a way to account for him because he's one of the few guys in the NFL that can single-handedly disrupt an offense's game plan.
Jason Peters, I'm sure you've heard the comments by now. I just know the Philly fans are effing idiots, but he meant it in a good way. And I feel like those comments got overblown of them being nasty, vulgar. They're going to cuss at you. They're going to throw stuff. Philly fans are the wildest fans out there to me. But I feel like fans didn't see the whole quote.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, with Jason Peters says what Jason Peters wants to say. He's not very worried about what people think. And I didn't hear the full quote. I saw the transcript of the quote. And, but I read it the same as you did. I don't think it's a situation where he's disparaging Philadelphia fans or anything. And as we were talking about the Cowboy thing earlier, I don't fully disagree with some of the things that he said. I mean, I do think the Cowboy hate and stuff like that is over the top at times. So, if people want to get upset about it, I'm sure they will, but I am not very concerned or bothered by what Jason Peters is saying right now.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things ESPN put it in, and I'm glad they did, what he said at the end. Well, Philly, that's my first Super Bowl. I built a lot of bricks there. I can't wait to go back. I love that place. And I feel like people just failed to mention that, but he also did kind of smile and said, I can't wait to be him because I'm wearing the star on my helmet now.
Yeah, well, that gets in the way of the story, and especially with what I do at our station, we like to play that angle of it up. So definitely, I think it's more love for Jason Peters than not. I think it's unfortunate how his career kind of ended in Philadelphia because he just, let's face it, he wasn't that good at the end here. But I mean, he's an old-time Eagle, and I think he's a guy who certainly will be in the Eagles Hall of Fame. And I mean, I think he even got to consider retiring the guy's jersey. He was that impactful of a player, that important of a player. And I mean, it's unfortunate he's playing for the Cowboys now, but he's still a great all-time Eagle, and it'll be interesting to see him out there with the Cowboys on Sunday.
I was thinking about this last week when we were talking to Zach Ertz. Of that Super Bowl team, who gets their number retired? I think it's going to be Kelce, but you can make a case for Ertz. You can make a case for a couple of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it. Yeah, that's a good question because, like you said, you can make a point for Ertz, Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox. Like a lot of these guys, have been extremely impactful and have been with the organization for a long time. So that's a real tough one. I mean, I think Kelce is probably the guy most likely to have his jersey retired, but it's not something the Eagles do very often. So, it might be none of them because they might feel like, okay, if we retire this guy's jersey, how do we not retire this guy's jersey? So that's a really difficult question, but I feel like they don't retire jerseys very often. So it wouldn't surprise me if they just, didn't retire any of them.
It's weird, though, how they went through that stretch after they had the Reed years. Like, Dawkins was a no-brainer. McNabb, to me, was a no-brainer at the time. But now as time has passed, it feels like, yeah, he probably should still have his number retired, but they did get a Super Bowl now, and I don't think the fans love Donovan as much as number 5 will always love you. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, I am a Donovan guy, so I wholeheartedly agreed with Donovan's number being retired. I think what he meant to the franchise, just with that era, meant to the franchise. Like the Eagles, let's face it, they weren't really a winning organization until Andy and Donovan got here and completely turned the trajectory of the organization around. So yeah, I'm glad they did it, but I think the sentiment overall from the fan base, I think you're right about that, Jeff. I think not a lot of people love or appreciate Donovan, and I think that's kind of a shame, and because they won't now. I mean, the fact that he didn't win a Super Bowl, the Eagles won one without him. I don't think he'll ever get the credit that he truly deserves because he really was a good quarterback here for a long time.
I get on a lot of the content creators that are in their 20s that not like they slammed on him. I think they respect him, but they always put up highlights of Vic Jackson. I said, you want a real Philadelphia treat and not the Donovan McNabb 14-second scramble, go to the game where he broke his leg against Arizona and threw for 4 touchdowns, which we didn't think was a big deal at the time until after the game. They're like, oh, wait, he just did what on a broken leg? And you felt like that would put him in Philly lore, and everybody just seems to forget it.
Yeah, and I think one of the things about Donovan that I don't think he gets enough credit for is that guy was tough. Like and that's why it bothers me when people make such a big deal out of the Super Bowl thing, because I think they present it as if it's a sign of weakness or something like that. When you look at Donovan, that guy took a lot of hits. He took a lot of punishment. He was playing in a different era where quarterbacks were not protected the way that they're protected now. And I mean, he played through a lot of injuries and was really tough. And I think that's one of the things, in addition to him being a really good quarterback, that he just doesn't get enough credit for.
I always thought when T.O. was going through his thing, when he was going in the hyperbaric chamber and all that, and I always commend him for his performance. But in the back of my mind, and maybe this is just me being 16, and I still kind of keep it, T.O. did not want to face the fact that maybe the Eagles could win the Super Bowl without him, and they would say goodbye to him.
Yeah, I think that was part of it. I think he obviously wanted to play in the game and was phenomenal that night in that game. But, I don't know what it was about how the kind of, divorce between he and Donovan started. But I do think that there's a lot of revisionist history there that bothers me, because now it's like if you ask the majority of people, most people would say, yeah, Donovan was wrong and they were on T.O.'s side. That's not the way people felt about it back in 2005. Like, T.O. was being really childish about the situation. He signed a contract. He was, going into the second year of a 7-year deal. And the idea that Donovan was supposed to take it upon himself to get T.O. a new contract, I just think that that's absurd. Like, if you want to get mad at Joe Banner for it, fine. But I don't know how people can really blame Donovan for the way that situation ended up deteriorating.
Yeah, from the way, it's weird too when you when you ask both of them, or if both of them would open up and ultimately tell the story. It does feel like T.O. went to Donovan and say, "Hey, I don't think they're going to do this. Can you do this?" Like, they'll listen to you, and Donovan just didn't do it. And for whatever reason, who knows? But Westbrook got his new deal, and I think that got T.O. really upset. It just felt like the relationship was deteriorating even before it actually deteriorated.
Yeah, and I think that's probably true. And I think, and that was probably one of Donovan's biggest flaws, I think, is he didn't feel like he got the credit he deserved. And while I think in certain instances, I think he was right, I do think that probably played into it. And I think on both sides, there was a lot of jealousy there. There was a lot of, I'm the reason why our offense is so good on Donovan's side and T.O.'s side. And I think that was part of what unfortunately broke them up. And it stinks, because we saw how great they were the 1 year together. And if they played together another 2 to 3 years, I absolutely believe the Eagles could have won a Super Bowl. And, that 2005 season that really went off the rails for the Eagles because of the whole T.O. thing, if that stuff doesn't happen and Donovan and T.O. do find a way to just make it through and work together, I think the Eagles could have gone on a deep run that year. That was a bad year in the NFL. When you think back, that was the Seattle-Pittsburgh Super Bowl, and it's like it just was not a very good year in the league. So, I think a lot of things might change, and that year might have been very different if those guys could have found a way to work together.
Yeah. What upset me that year was they were kind of starting to hit their stride, and it seemed like, T.O. had a little petty thing like, oh, the Eagles didn't acknowledge me for my 100 touchdown catch, which I thought was kind of cruel by the Eagles at the time. I'm like, I don't care what your thoughts are about him. You should acknowledge it. But, he always brought up little intricacies, but him and McNabb worked their way through it. And then all of a sudden he says the Brett Favre thing, and I'm like, oh, come on, man. Like, This is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And T.O., that's the way he was. He just liked to needle and needle and needle. And hey, there's a reason why everywhere T.O. went, it ended the same way. Like, it's not everybody else, it's T.O. And wherever he went, whether it's San Francisco, the Eagles, Dallas, it ends poorly everywhere he ends up playing. And, I think that was really a reflection on him as a teammate. He just wasn't a very good teammate.
don't you think it's kind of crazy how Reed still loves T.O.? Like, Andy Reid brings T.O. to Chiefs practices, and, he still embraces it. Like, it doesn't matter what happened in the past. Like, Andy Reid just finds a way to just ignore everything.
Yeah, and that's one of Andy's greatest qualities is players love him. And that's why, regardless of what flaws people want to point out with Andy, what's important is that your players love you. And even when, like you said, there's been animosity in the past, they can find a way to get over it and move forward. And I think that's a situation where T.O. recognizes playing for Andy was good for his career. That was, if not the best, certainly one of the best years of his career. And Andy's players all seem to love him.
Don't you think too? I know we're getting into a lot of Andy Reid history here, but do you think the Eagles kind of regret letting Andy Reid go? I know they won a Super Bowl and everything, and they've been fine without him, but don't you think in a way they kind of regret letting him go after what he's been doing in Kansas?
I don't. I think it was time to go. Like, and even as much as I liked Andy Reid, I thought it was time for a change at the end of 2012, because think back, 2011, 2012, they were just not good years here. And I think over time, a coach's message or the way he gets across to his team can kind of get stale. And to a degree, I think we saw it with Doug. I think there are a lot of other things going on in 2020 with that team. But yeah, I think it was time for a change. But man, if you could tell me the Eagles could have kept it, Andy, and ended up having Patrick Mahomes, that would have been pretty nice.
Finally, what was your instant reaction when basically Ron Rivera blamed Carson Wentz for why the Commanders aren't as good as the other three teams in this division?
I couldn't believe it. And it's just, I couldn't believe it, but I could totally believe it at the same time, because I don't know what it is about Carson Wentz, but it doesn't seem like people like him very much. And it doesn't seem like anybody's going out of their way to protect him. And I don't know. I don't think he's like intentionally a jerk or anything. I just think there's a quality about him that's kind of unlikable, which is not what we believed at the beginning of his career. But man, everywhere he goes, whether it's the way it ended here, the way it ended last year, Irsay threw him under the bus, and now Rivera throwing him under the bus. I mean, I don't think it's going to end very well. And now reports that he's playing injured again, and he's going to play through an injury tonight. So we'll see how it plays out. But I'm not. It doesn't look like it's going too well for Carson in Washington. And I'm not going to lie, Jeff, I kind of think the Bears are going to beat them again tonight.
In a way, I kind of do too. It seemed like Justin Fields is starting to turn a corner a bit. I actually liked what I saw out of that Vikings game.
Yeah, they played well in that game. I mean, I still think the Vikings are a very good team. And that's why I think, out of the Eagles' victories this year, that was certainly the most impressive as I see it. But yeah, I think, the Bears are at least playing with some fire under the new coach, and Justin Fields seems to be improving. So it should be an interesting game tonight, because I think the loser can probably start looking toward the 2023 draft.
What did you think of? I don't know if you saw the story. I can't remember if it was Joe Santamaquillo or not. I can't remember who it was, but when Wentz was with the Eagles, he was like trying to act like the cool kid at the cool kid stable. Did you think that was all? I don't want to say it was far-fetched, because Joe's been right on a lot of this reporting, but it doesn't feel like that was a little overblown.
Maybe, and it's hard for me to say, because hey, I mean, I think a lot of people doubted those reports when they were made, but in the end, I think a lot of what Joe wrote turned out to be correct. I mean, he took a lot of heat for that, and in the end, I think it was pretty decent reporting, and I don't know to the extent it was with Carson, but I certainly think there's something with him, whether it's his personality or what it is, where he just can't capture the support of a locker room. And for a quarterback, that's important. You see it with a guy like Jalen Hurts, and why, even though we still might have some questions about Jalen's abilities, less now than we did, I think, 5 weeks ago. But I mean, the fact that he does have that ability to rally a locker room, rally guys behind him, is not insignificant. And that's something Carson was never really able to figure out.
It's probably a big reason why the Eagles are 5-0 right now. All right, TK, always a pleasure. Are you going to be on WIP tonight by any chance?
I will be on WIP tonight following Bears Washington. So we'll get into Eagles, Cowboys, obviously, Phil's playoffs, and I'll also be on from 10 to 2 tomorrow night following Phil's postgame coverage, and Sunday afternoon from 1 to 5 p.m. Getting you ready for Eagles Cowboys Sunday night.
Are you going to any of the Phillies playoff games this weekend?
I don't believe I'm going to be able to make it down. I'm not working any of the games this weekend. I work as an engineer in the radio booth sometimes, but I don't think I'm going to be down there this weekend. Maybe in the NLCS if they advance.
All right, son. Sounds great. Tom, I'll have to get you on again. Tom Kelly for Sports Radio WIP, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, Jeff.